hello again, everybody. It's now our second week in Scotland, and we, Terry and I, are having a great time. There's nothing that beats the beauty and the majesty of Scotland. But I've got something more important to say, and that's about the reading that we had today. So in this, we have the theme of forgiveness. We have the paralytic, and then he forgives the paralytic's sins, but it's the scribes now and the Pharisees who say, wait a minute now, forgiveness of sins is reserved to God alone. And so they complain and they gripe. And so Jesus says, but that you may know that the Son of Man has authority on earth to forgive sins, he says to the paralytic, rise, take up your bed and go home. Now, what this has caused in the church today, well, the historic church too, but we now have in both the Catholic Church and the Orthodox Church, we have the sacrament of confession. So what Jesus has given to us that was not possible before is that through his divinely spoken words that he said to the apostles, that they now have the ability to loose sins, meaning they can forgive sins, or they can hold those sins, penance. This ushered in for the apostles a new era, that they, through the authority of Jesus Christ, have been given that authority to forgive sins. Now, in some churches, like the Protestant church, there is not necessarily the sacrament of confession in the sense that the Orthodox Church has it. And so many times, and especially in non-denominational churches, you will hear that, well, you don't need to confess to a priest, you confess to God alone. And what they miss is this important authority that has been given to from Jesus Christ to his apostles, and that now through apostolic succession has come down to the clergy. So through now the laying on of hands of the bishop to me, then I have that authority now to compassionately and mercifully then decide on the forgiveness of sins, to loose or to bind those sins. And so confession has to be understood that it comes from apostolic succession. It is scripturally based. But for the Orthodox, it has two components that we must understand. That first component is the ability to loose or to bind. And that's when we read the prayers of absolution. But equally important is the compassion. Look at the compassion that Jesus showed to the paralytic, to the blind man, and to the woman who chased after him, to the son that had the demonic. In each case, he offered them compassion, but he listened to them first. And that's what the first part of confession is that the priest sits down with the penitent person, with the person who is giving the confession, and finding out what is behind that. Because it's not enough to just loose sins. We have to discover what is at the root of that. And so there is a therapeutic value that comes from talking with the priest. Because sometimes, from my own personal experience, sometimes people are trapped and mired in a sin which they think is a sin, but is not a sin. And other times, we have a discussion that reveals a sinful behavior that they didn't realize was sinful. So just as you would go to a doctor to get a sound diagnosis, confession now is that diagnosis. Now, again, I'm not saying that as priests, that we're perfect, but we are your spiritual doctors. We're not your marriage counselors, and we're not your therapist or your psychologist. What we are is your spiritual guide. So we can say, there is a marital issue here, and I can have a resource to help you. There is a psychological issue here. There is some other issue, and I can provide those resources to you. But what I am responsible for is your spiritual welfare. And through this gospel reading today, now, Jesus, through his authority, has given the church the authority through apostolic succession to be able to forgive sins or to hold those sins.